Narcissistic abuse damages our sense of self because our sense of self is constantly in flux. An exchange of psychological influence occurs between us and those around us. Thank you for joining me today on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Carrie Kerr-McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience and a narcissistic abuse survivor. In this episode, we're going to take a close look at this process and how abuse impacts our sense of self, as well as outline some ways to begin healing our self-esteem after abuse. I'm thrilled you're here with me today. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes and leave a review. Let me know what you think of the show. Finally, thank you for your donation to this listener-supported podcast because together we're shedding light on all things related to abuse. So with that, let's listen into this replay of a TikTok Live. A friend was asking me yesterday about how is self-worth created? How do you and I know we have value, that our needs, desires, goals, dreams, fears are important, have the right to take up space? And then what do we do after we've been abused? How do we heal when there's been profound damage to our self-esteem? How did that actually happen? How did the damage to our self-esteem happen? Aren't we fully formed adults? Don't we come into relationships knowing who we are? Then why did this affect us? Is it because we're weak? Or maybe we have poor boundaries? We don't protect ourselves good enough? So imagine a baby is born and it really doesn't have its sense of itself as separate from mom. It sees himself as just sort of part of the mother unit. They call it the baby mother dyad. And as it's being fed and nurtured and loved and kept warm and dry, it has a sense of itself as being worthy of that it's lovable and that it has value and it's important. It senses that. And if there's moments where there's disconnect, it tries to make sense of that. It tries to process that. And then as it begins to grow, it starts to have a sense, the baby, she or he, has a sense of themselves as separate from the parent, as from the primary caregivers. And they realize caregivers can leave, and then the abandonment fears start to show up, but also caregivers can kind of take over and be too intense and be too close and don't let them be themselves. And so they get afraid of what's called engulfment or enmeshment. That twin fear is a fear that is very primitive and very basic, but a part of all of our makeup. We all still have those fears of abandonment and of being engulfed. As this happens, we start to then have a sense that we are imperfect. For one, we poop our pants and we have accidents and we're clumsy. We don't do things well. And there's a sense of shame about that. We wonder what will happen. Will we lose the relationship when the person sees that we've messed things up? We hope there's a resiliency to the connection with our primary caregivers, that they love us despite that. And it's when we experience our shame and then have them love us despite what's happened, we become to be aware of our unconditional nature of our acceptance, and our self-worth grows. We know that we're bigger than our mistakes. We know we don't have to show up so perfectly. All these experiences kind of inform and shape us, and we continue to go through our childhood and in young adolescence experimenting and practicing new things, and we see how it hits, how it lands in our social world, and how our parents interact with us, and our siblings interact with us, how our friends interact with us. And all of this continues to inform how we see ourselves. Yes, we also inform ourselves. We take chances and find out that it succeeds, and then we get confident in our ability to do new things and realize that it goes well. So it's also happening at the same time with ourselves, but it's also happening in the context of relationships. Our sense of self is never derived in the absence of relationship. We're relational creatures from the moment we're conceived, and will be relational all the way until we pass away. We always see ourselves in the context of a greater community, and that impacts and influences our sense of self. So we get into a relationship, we get into a narcissistically abusive or an abusive relationship, and the dynamics, of course, for the person who's abusive, the dynamic is all about power and control, domination. They do that, though, by making you a subject or submissive to their needs, to their agenda. And there's at the root of narcissism, and I don't know if it's necessarily the root of psychopathy, but it certainly is the root of narcissism, is this envy this fear of not life being fair and not having things equal and reciprocal. So they then don't like your success. They resent your confidence and your achievement. It's interesting because they choose you because you're a confident person, and they like that, makes them look good. You reflect well to them. But when they're in a relationship with you and up close, your success, your confidence is a reminder of their insecurity, painful to be around it. So one way that they solve that is they diminish, degrade, devalue, and minimize you. That's a way to, in other words, and almost kind of pervert or degrade, contaminate your goodness, contaminate your value. So they begin to do this eroding of your self-esteem. They do that through criticism. Often it's painted as they are doing a favor for you so that you're better for their criticism. I always found it really ironic, how they would even criticize in areas that you're supposedly an expert, but they're more of an expert. They have to kind of show you up in your good spots, your best points. But they also do it around deprivation. They will begin to control your world, your environment, who your friends are, how you spend your time, when you get to eat, how much sleep you get. They begin to sort of subjugate you to them as a way to elevate, puff up, and make themselves feel more secure and better because of their shakiness, their insecurity. And they will also then begin to gaslight, which is to substitute your reality or what you're experiencing as true and real for you for theirs. And often that's partly to deceive and to minimize you. But it's also a way to create insecurity in you, to erode, again, your sense of what you think is true and real. They are replacing that so that you're on shaky foundation and you're no longer sure. It's this constant chipping away. So the question is, if we come into these relationships fully adult, then why is it so impactful? Well, that goes back to what I was saying in the beginning about us from the moment we're born. We're relational creatures. Part of what happens is that our sense of self is shaped by how others experience you. So let me give you an example. So say that you actually, this is a research project that happened. I thought this is fascinating. So they actually did this study. They had a subject that they identified, or several subjects, and they told the people in the environment of that subject to tell that person they looked ill. Are they okay? Are they feeling okay? So that person, the subject, heard repeatedly throughout the day, "You look a little off. Are you doing okay? Because I'm a little worried about you," or something like that. Would you know, the person went home sick. They began to feel ill and then actually left work because they began to wonder if they're well. So that's the power of suggestion. I know that's just suggestion, but imagine that you were in an environment that constantly questioned you, questioned the validity of what you did, criticized you, wondered how, if you're that big of an expert, minimized you, made you feel degraded, made you feel like not even second class, but third or fourth or fifth class. Make sure they kept you under their thumb. Your needs didn't regulate. You were invisible. In a narcissistic world, you're invisible. They don't see people as people. They just see people as tools. Well, what happens to us is that it ends up eroding our sense of self, and we begin to doubt ourselves, and it creates confusion. And we, as a way to keep peace and hoping that we'll have the relationship return to its good stage, the love bombing, which we think is real, even though it's not real, we keep hoping that by us being smaller, being less, asking for less, doing things more their way, we keep hoping as we submit to greater and greater degrees, we can repair the relationship. But what happens is we're damaging our sense of self. I remember Kristen Milstead said that she found that her sense of self got so small, so tiny, she could hardly hear who she was and how she felt about things. It's interesting, we just did a poll here on TikTok and we asked, do you have low self-esteem after abuse? 50% of you said, I have no self-esteem. Another 41% said, I have some, but not enough. And then only 8.33% said it didn't affect me. So yeah, that gives you a sense of how powerful this whole process is and its ability to shape, color, give definition to ourselves, because we are reciprocal creatures. We're reciprocal creatures. We're constantly taking input. So just like that person who went to work and heard repeatedly, you look ill today, it made that person ill. They felt ill and they went home. We have the power to impact each other. which is really powerful when you think about that. That to me is quite serious responsibility in what we say to people and how we say it to people. I know we talk a lot about our own self-talk, the power in self-talk, but we often don't pause long enough and talk about the power of what we hear from those around us. And I'm not saying that I want us to just be overly positive. I actually don't like highly positivity. I think that can be toxic too, because it's denial of our whole self and we have hard moments. But are we around people who build us up? Are we around people who are non-judgmental and really give us permission to be fully ourselves? Are we around people that allow us to do things that maybe they don't agree with, that they're uncomfortable for them, but they don't need to weigh in because it's our life? They allow it to be our life. When we're in these abusive relationships, we're in a relationship with somebody who pretty much gives us a script and expects you to follow it. And the extra hard part, not only is it a script that so you don't get to be yourself, but it's a script you don't even get to see what the script is. So you're trying to live up to some expectation that you don't even know what the expectation is. And of course you're doomed to fail that, which then see again, the power of that, to know that you are supposed to be living up to something. You don't even know what it is, but you know you're failing it all the time. It's very damaging to our sense of self. They're thinking, and I think this is fascinating, that narcissistic abuse is one of the worst forms of abuse because of the degree that erodes our sense of self, because it causes this lack of confidence. And I think it's really powerful. We pause on this and think about that. So evaluate your social environment. One of the first books I read as I was leaving in the narcissistic relationship was Why Does He Do That? By Lundy Bancroft. Mr. Bancroft spent most of his life's work trying to understand the angry and controlling male mind. Reading through his profile descriptions of abusive men validated what I had just experienced. It confirmed that I had gone through something terrible and helped me understand that it wasn't my fault and that I hadn't done anything to deserve the abuse. It is my great pleasure to announce that I'll be interviewing Lundy Bancroft live February 9th. Learn who abuses and why. What is the effect of abuse on our children? And how do we know when it's time to leave? Come be my guest for this 90-minute webinar and learn firsthand more about abusive men and their relationships. For the final 30 minutes, you get to anonymously ask Mr. Bancroft your questions. Early bird tickets are now on sale. The price is going to go up after the new year. This is a must-see event, and all ticket holders will leave a complimentary replay of the event. Let's imagine for a moment that most of you are out of a relationship and you're now just trying to get your feet back underneath of you and recover. And we're going to ignore the fact whether or not your abusive ex is still a part of your life, whether or not they're creating drama through the legal system or whatever. I'm going to ignore that because I know that that's impactful. But I want to just focus on you. I want to focus on how to help you heal after abuse. Your self is not lost. It's still there. It's just gotten really quiet. You have learned because of again, think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know how familiar you are with Maslow's work. He said, and it's a theory, but I think it's very valid. He said that our basic need is when we're out in survival, you know how they dump people out naked and alone in the survival things? Their basic need is shelter and food. We're going to be concerned with that first. So if you're in a situation where you're completely exposed, your first thing that you're going to attend to is not how happy you are, or it's not even whether or not you're fed. You're going to simply find shelter and protection from the elements because you need to survive the night. That's your primary resource or goal. And Maslow, interestingly, I think maybe I'm mixing him up with somebody else, but one of these people who was a writer, and I may be mixing him up, actually survived the Holocaust. I think I am. I'll think of the other person. Maybe I'm not. Maybe it was Maslow. But anyway, you can look him up. He's a very interesting guy with interesting history. The second basic nature is we want to make sure that we're going to be fed and all that kind of stuff. So the very bottom is physiological needs. You need to know that you have food, water, shelter, and clothing. Your next basic need is safety. You need to know that you are not going to be eaten by the lion. Right now, I'm signing up for healthcare, that I have insurance so I don't get bankrupt should I have a health crisis or something. You need to know that you're secure. Now, when we're in an abusive situation, that's all we can attend to. We need to know that our basic needs are being attended to, and we need to feel safe. And we exclusively focus on that. And when you leave an abusive relationship, you continue for a long time just to focus on safety. The next need after that is love and belonging. And then after that is self-esteem or good esteem. And then finally, self-actualization. I'm going to be honest with you guys, we never get to the top rung. I wish we did, but we don't. Most of us top out at love and belonging, and we struggle sometimes even to deal with much of esteem. These are like in a perfect world situation, and most of us don't live in a perfect world. So most of us are concerned with some mid-level tier. But when you're in an abusive relationship, you're primarily focused on physiological needs and safety needs. And when you leave one, you continue because of the ramped up physiological neurology you got from being in this fight or flight stage. You continue to focus on safety and physiological needs, which means you don't get to focus on feeling like you're loved and belong and that you have a self-esteem and focusing on yourself. So the first thing I want you to do is assess how safe is your environment, excluding the ex who's creating drama. And hopefully you can get that person out of your life once the legal piece settles down. How then safe is your environment? Are you picking people who allow you to be yourself? Are you learning, again, relearning what you like to do? Are you taking back your leisure time and doing things that are important to you, that make you feel cared for and seen? One of the things I lost that's really important to me is I like to unwind while watching TV at night. It's been a long time ritual of mine for most of my life. When I was living with my ex, he controlled the TV and watched stuff that I really hated. So I wasn't able to focus on things that would help me to relax. So I lost something that was really critical to me. So one of the things that I had to do when I got back out was to take that back and take ownership of it. It's sometimes one of the things that we do is we end up not knowing how to take these things back. We struggle with it. We almost like become an abuser to ourselves and neglectful of ourselves. But watch for that. Part of that is because you just don't want to get in trouble. That's where you need to remind yourself you're in a safe environment, that you're not being abused anymore because you're controlling who's in your world and who's not in your world. So become kind of comfortable with reclaiming these things that are important to you. Like, what foods do you enjoy eating? What friendships have you lost track of that maybe you need to reacquaint yourself with? Kind of like check out these things that you may have lost sight of. I think another thing that's super, super important in reclaiming our sense of self is really reevaluating our social system. For me, I found out that I had accidentally surrounded myself with a lot of toxic people. I'd gotten used to be so accommodating, so easygoing, that I didn't realize that I accidentally had made myself appealing to predatory people. So I had to clean house. For a while, I had nearly no relationships as I needed to rebuild, but I had to become okay with losing all the relationships in order for me to have room to invite new relationships back in. So slow down and assess yourself. Assess your relationships with other people. Are they people who really value you and see you as important? So those are the first two things, is reclaim yourself, your activities, your hobbies, your interests, your things that you enjoy. The second is really make sure that you're careful about who you let in your life, because again, as I said, how we shape ourselves is the feedback we get. If you get people who are running you down or critical of you or make you feel edgy or unsafe, then you're keeping your fight or flight system highly activated and very, very anxious and concerned. And then I think the last thing is begin to cautiously, carefully, but deliberately set goals. Begin to think about what is it you want to do to make your life your own. I know that for me, this is where I'm at right now. I would say that's my new challenge. If I end up being single for the rest of my life, and I'm 60 now, so we're talking, for the next however long I'm healthy to be able to do the things that I want to do, what do I need to do in order for me to have a good life? And for me to break the frame and thinking that only people who are retired together and doing things as a couple has a good life. No, that's not true. That's what culture says. That's what society feeds us. That's not necessarily true. You can have a good life being your age and doing the things that you want. You can do that. It doesn't need to have a partner. This fear of being alone, and it was huge for me. Being alone was one that really controlled me, partly because I'd come out of teenage years feeling very, very lonely and cut off and an outsider. But for me to realize that was, I can become my own friend. I've talked about that in one of my recent videos. I can become my own friend and make my life feel rich. I can enjoy this moment and do things with other people that are really, really fun. So here's some things I'm doing as the year end, because, everyone knows how we go all out to New Year's Eve as a couple and all that stuff. A friend of mine got a hold of me and said, let's go to a Great Gatsby New Year's party in Dallas. We're buying outfits, going to dress up and putting stuff in my hair, and got the long beads coming in the mail. And I'm going to dress up like a flapper and go to the Great Gatsby party. We may be the only two women there without partners, but hell, I'm having a good time. That's one of the things I'm going to do. We're also heading over to New Orleans here in a few weeks. I'm super excited about seeing New Orleans at Christmas time. I know most people see it at Mardi Gras, but hey, I've never been. I'm excited about that. I've really loved traveling all over this year with Narc Avengers. It's been a lot of fun too, getting to meet new people, getting to meet you. So those are the ways in which we recapture our life, is not waiting for it to be whatever we perceive to be perfect, but set the goals now. Ask yourself, what is it you really like to do? And how can you make this happen in the way that works for you? And that's part of finding yourself and reclaiming and healing yourself. And all of these experiences rebuilds your sense of self, gives you more confidence, helps you take more risks, lets you know that you're able to succeed and you're not failing. All of these things kind of build on themselves. So really watch for that. Reclaim your activities, be careful of your social support system, make sure it's supportive, and then begin to set longer term goals that don't conform to necessarily cultural definitions, because they're cultural. It doesn't mean they're real or good. So was today's episode new information about how our sense of self is impacted and actually open for input and feedback? It was helpful for me to revisit the idea as I was reviewing this podcast. It helped me make more sense why the abuse I experienced had hit me so hard, why I'm experiencing some struggles with confidence, especially in some social situations. So what did you take away from today's episode? Consider leaving a review or emailing and DMing me and letting me know. And thank you for being here today. I'll see you back on Thursday. Bye-bye.